Was Sir Duncan the Tall really knighted, or was he lying? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we cover A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings, and other great fantasy books and TV shows like The Witcher. Welcome. It's one of the oldest questions in the A Song of Ice and Fire community. Was Sir Duncan the Tall, Dunk from the Dunk and Egg stories, actually a knight? He says he was knighted, but we never actually saw it happen, and he seems rather cagey on the subject. So let's see what clues we have. And there are obviously spoilers here for the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms TV show. At the time of writing this video, the show isn't out yet, so we don't know how they will handle it. This video is very much focused on what happens in the novellas. Dunk himself was plucked from Flea Bottom as a young boy by Sir Arlen of Pennytree, and other than the oddity of a hedge knight choosing his new squire from the slums of King's Landing, which is very odd, I'm sure we'll find out more about that in future stories, there is nothing particularly suspicious in his youth, which he seems to have spent trailing around after the kindly Sir Arlen. We pick up on the story in The Hedge Knight immediately after Sir Arlen's death from a fever, when Dunk is burying him. This is an important moment for Dunk. He never knew his parents, his mentor and protector is dead, and he seems to have no particular friends. He is all alone in the world and has to decide what to do with the rest of his life. The whole story is from his perspective, so we hear his thoughts as he's going through the various options open to him. He thinks this: I could find another hedge knight in need of a squire to tend his animals and clean his mail, he thought. Or might be I could go to some city, to Lannisport or King's Landing, and join the city watch. Or else... At which point Dunk starts going through Sir Arlen's old things, his armour, his belt, his sword, checking to see whether they might fit him, and remembers that there is a tourney about to take place nearby. This passage is jam-packed with clues about what's really going on. To start with, it is blatantly obvious that none of the career options Dunk is considering here are knightly options. Instead, they're jobs for squires, finding another knight to squire for, or joining a city watch, for example. He doesn't initially think about doing anything that a hedge knight might do. Head to a castle to seek service, look for a local tourney, and so on. Indeed, his first thought was even to sell Thunder, Sir Arlen's warhorse, showing that he wasn't thinking about using it at all. Put simply, Dunk was not thinking about himself as a knight, which is extraordinary when you consider that, according to the story he tells later, he had been made a knight just hours earlier. Surely, if that had happened, his first thoughts would be about what to do as a new knight, not whether he might be able to find someone to squire to again. Knights do not squire for other knights, even Dunk would know that. No, the most sensible explanation for all this is that Dunk had not been knighted. But when, after going through his options, he says, or else, it's him having an idea that he could pretend that he had been knighted. The language here is crucial. We don't read that Dunk suddenly remembered that he was a knight, so decided to go to the tourney. We read that he had an idea about how not to be a squire or a member of a city watch, checked Sir Arlen's things to see whether they would fit, and then headed off for the tourney. George R. R. Martin cuts away at that point, so we don't get to read about all of this thought process, but the implication is clear. Dunk has decided to lie and pretend that he is a knight. Of course, Dunk being Dunk, he didn't really think through where he would first go to establish his reputation. Tourneys in the Reach, like the tourney at Ashford Meadow that he was heading to, regularly required proof of knightly credentials, and the format of this particular tourney— there were a variety of different tourney structures in Westeros, I'll do a video on it at some point— meant that he would almost certainly have to face a strong opponent straight away. It's actually probably a blessing that he never had to do any proper jousting here. Dunk is very good at hand-to-hand combat, where his strength and size were a huge advantage, but less good when it comes to jousting, as we see in The Mystery Knight. Anyway, we now have Dunk travelling to the tourney, with all the evidence pointing to him pretending to be a knight. More specifically, lying that Sir Arlen had knighted him on his deathbed. So, is there any evidence later in the stories that this is the case? Well, yes, there is. First, it's important to note that this is all written from Dunk's perspective. But that's not to say that we hear everything that's in Dunk's mind. In classic George R. R. Martin style, he is an unreliable narrator. His thoughts may not lie to us, but we also don't hear everything he is thinking. It's as if the camera pans away at vital moments. Nevertheless, we can tell a lot by how he feels at certain moments, and what he does and doesn't do. Dunk feels a lot of stuff. He is a teenager here, after all. He gets embarrassed around women, seems to develop his honour code largely from truisms spouted by Sir Arlen, and gets angry when people break it, and has a huge inferiority complex when it comes to his intellect and knowledge of the world. Several times each story, we hear him reminding himself that he is Dunk the Lunk, thicker than a castle wall. But despite all that, and incidentally, all of those things are part of what adds up to making Dunk such a lovable character, there are actually very few occasions when Dunk gets embarrassed. He happily stumbles into conversations with princes, fights against famous opponents, and challenges septons and maesters alike when he thinks they are wrong, only berating himself later for not realising everything that was going on. No, all in all, Dunk isn't a man to get self-conscious about who he is all that often in the heat of the moment. There are really only two things that usually throw him in the moment, and both of those things throw him repeatedly. The first is women, specifically women he finds attractive. He stumbles over his words around both Tanselle Too-Tall in The Hedge Knight and Lady Rohan Webber in The Swan Sword. On both occasions we read that he feels his cheeks redden or ears burn. The other thing that throws him every time is when someone asks him about how he became a knight. Again, he feels his ears burn and stumbles over his words when the Master of the Lists asks him about it. He's embarrassed and claims not to remember much about the details of what would have been a life-changing moment that happened just a few days ago. The only sensible conclusion we can draw is that Dunk, who is an honourable man who doesn't like to lie, is hiding something important to do with his story of how he became a knight. And there are two incidents later in The Hedge Knight that take this probability that Dunk is lying and make it a near certainty in my view. The first is when Dunk finally learns about Egg's true identity. Egg comes to him to apologise for lying about who he was. We read again from Dunk's point of view. Dunk looked at him thoughtfully. He knew what it was like to want something so badly that you would tell a monstrous lie just to get near it. "I thought you were like me," he said. "Might be you are, only not the way I thought." So Dunk here is admitting to us that he has also told what he considers a monstrous lie, and that Egg lying about who he was makes him like Dunk. We don't know of any other lies Dunk has told, let alone monstrous ones, so what else can it be than a lie about being a knight? Particularly when we know that Dunk dreamed of being a knight from the moment that Sir Arlen first let him hold a sword. In the passage, Dunk says that he had thought that he and Egg were alike. He'd thought that they were both orphan boys from King's Landing, slightly out of their depth among all the lords and ladies of the tourney. Now he knows that's not true. Egg was lying. But that just means that they are alike in a different way, Dunk concludes. They were both lying about who they were. And then, probably the most telling bit of evidence. As Dunk is preparing for his trial of 7, it becomes apparent that he needs a couple more people, knights specifically, to make up his 7, and there is an obvious candidate to help make up the gap, Raymond Fossaway. The only problem is that he isn't a knight yet. We read, again from Dunk's point of view, "Knight me." Raymond put a hand on Dunk's shoulder and turned him. "I will take my cousin's place, Sir Duncan. Knight me." He went to one knee. Frowning, Dunk moved a hand to the hilt of his longsword, then hesitated. "Raymond, I should not." "You must. Without me you are only 5. "The lad has the truth of it," said Sir Lion Baratheon. "Do it, Sir Duncan. Any knight can make a knight." "Do you doubt my courage?" Raymond asked. "No," said Dunk. "Not that, but—" Still he hesitated. A fanfare of trumpets cut the misty morning air. Egg came running up to them. "Sir, Lord Ashford summons you." The laughing storm gave an impatient shake of the head. "Go to him, Sir Duncan. I'll give Squire Raymond his knighthood." Dunk left them there, feeling as relieved as he was guilty. Relieved? Guilty? The only reason why Dunk might feel those things is if he knew he couldn't, in all conscience, knight Raymond, and the only real reason why he might not have been able to do that was because he couldn't, because he wasn't a knight. As Sir Lionel said, any knight can make a knight, and Dunk couldn't think of a reason why Raymond shouldn't be knighted. He didn't object to Lionel doing it. In fact, he felt relieved that he had, and yet Dunk hesitated in doing it himself, because he was an honourable man living a lie. He wasn't a knight, and therefore didn't have the authority to knight someone else. And there are other clues, of course. At one point, Dunk, being rather down, thinks that, "I'm not even a hedge knight." And after the trial of 7, he wonders whether he is now a knight in truth. And when we think about it, Dunk not actually being a knight makes sense thematically as well. Regardless of whether Dunk is technically a knight, he is repeatedly referred to here and elsewhere as being a true knight. It's a standard he holds himself to, as something Sir Arlan taught him, and others see it in him. Once every story, in fact, someone says it. It's clearly an important theme. Prince Baelor in The Hedge Knight says that he protected the weak as every true knight must. Sir Eustace calls him a true knight in The Sworn Sword, and Sir Glandon Ball does the same in The Mystery Knight. Dunk may not technically be a knight, but he is a true knight. This concept of the true knight runs through A Song of Ice and Fire. It is used to refer to a knight who upholds the knightly virtues. They must be brave and just, defend the young and innocent, protect women, and fight for right. Dunk clearly does all of this. He rushes to protect Tansel Too Tall against overwhelming odds in The Hedge Knight, protects the small folk from likely massacre in The Sworn Sword, and eagerly seeks the just solution to the conflict when he could easily have walked away, and goes to great lengths not to cheat anyone or abuse his power. Dunk does everything a true knight should do, but even so, he is consistently treated as less than a knight because of his humble beginnings and because he is just a hedge knight. All of which makes Dunk an archetype for the kind of character we see several times in A Song of Ice and Fire, the true knight who is technically not a knight at all. Sandor Clegane is a clear example of this in a rather lopsided way. We see it clearly through Sansa's eyes. She heads south to King's Landing with a head full of ideals of knightly chivalry and soon loses them when she sees what most knights are actually like. But Sandor, in his gruff, uncompromising way, does do many of the things a true knight should. He protects her, and then Arya. He is clearly brave, facing up to his own debilitating fear of fire, and, on the TV show at least, went on a character arc that led him to fighting for justice and the right. He isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he also, like Dunk, has more than a hint of the true knight to him, despite technically never having been a knight. But of course, the best example of this is Brienne. She is also technically not a knight. As a woman, she is excluded from that, but she, probably more than anyone else in A Song of Ice and Fire, embodies the knightly virtues. Her entire story arc revolves around her upholding her promises to Renly or Catelyn, searching to find and then protect the Stark children. She fights for the right and upholds justice, even when it places her in danger. Added to which, of course, George R.R. Martin has confirmed, tacitly at least, that Brienne is a descendant of Dunk. The physical similarity, both being remarkably tall and strong and with noticeably similar fighting styles, is pretty obvious, but George R.R. Martin has also given us a very strong hint with their shields. When designing his family crest, because of course he didn't have one, he opted for an elm tree with green branches and a shooting star above it. Brienne, when she is getting her shield repainted, remembers, lovingly it would appear, a very old and very similar-sounding shield that she once found in her father's armoury. She remembered how she'd run her fingers across the cracked and faded paint, over the green leaves of the trees and along the path of the falling star. For me, that adds a beautiful symmetry to their characters, two true knights who technically weren't knights at all. And when you start to think about it, even Brienne's traipsing around Westeros with her squire Pod does seem very reminiscent of Dunk and Egg traipsing around Westeros. So we have to ask whether this deliberate echoing implies anything else. Is his fate hers? To become Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, despite technically not being a knight? To die tragically and heroically in the centre of a blazing inferno? Well, perhaps. But what about Dunk himself? Will he ever admit to anyone that he wasn't technically ever knighted? If he doesn't feel able to knight someone because it would be wrong, would he be able to accept being a member of the Kingsguard or its Lord Commander? Might he confide in Egg, and might Egg knight him when he is king? It would be a touching moment for the truest knight in the Seven Kingdoms to finally, actually, become a true knight. If you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire videos, please click on the link on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.